Hello Mayhem makers, happy Monday. Welcome back to another Mindy's Monday Mayhem Live tips and tricks and all kinds of things. Today I decided we're going to give you a good basic cutting tip. Conversation came up with a customer earlier, so I thought what better time to actually do a video about it. I had somebody that had a problem with the strips that they had cut. Once they were sewn together, turned wavy. Been a common topic for me lately because my sew along also uses strips sewn together, so it's a big common issue. Of course, it's just something we tackle in everyday life of sewing. So the first question I always ask is, did you cut your fabric straight? It seems silly, obvious, but believe it or not, it's not always the easiest thing to do. So I've got just kind of a sample piece of fabric here, and this is a full width of fabric. So it goes from the selvage, which is that raw edge, all the way to the other selvage of fabric. So I'm not working with a fat quarter this time, actual full yardage. Now when you're playing with it and you get it like straight off the bolt, hey Evelyn, welcome Olympia, I love it. It looks straight, but it isn't always straight. It's a little deceiving for you guys because how we cut it is just kind of how it's wrapped on the bolt. And because machines and things wrap the fabric, they can stretch and warp and all that, and so it's not always as pretty as you'd like it. So one of the tricks I do when I get yardage is I'll go and I'll iron it. This isn't as ironed as pretty as I'd like to. I'm not at home, unfortunately. I'm at the shop, so didn't have as much time to make it all nice and pretty like I would at home. But I give it a nice good press. A lot of times I use my starch spray, which was last week's topic of my combo of best press, flatter, and water. And so I'll do a nice good spray so it's nice and crisp. The biggest trick though to make sure you're getting it straight is I take it and I will match my two selvages. All right, so I take it in my fingers and I try to line them up. So hopefully you can see. So they're not quite lined up. We're going to line them up. The biggest trick though, I'm going to skew it a little first to make it more obvious, is sometimes the top may be lined up, but it might look, hopefully you can see kind of this wrinkle that's starting to happen in the bottom. And sadly, a lot of times it comes off the bolt looking like this. Drives us crazy in the quilt shops. Okay, so what I end up doing is I start kind of maneuvering those selvages and scooting, so I may scoot the back side to the right and the front side to the left, if that makes sense, until the fold at the bottom is nice and even. And if you look at this piece, I mean, look at that. It was cut straight off the bolt. And now that I've manipulated it, look at how off it is. So sometimes, even though it's come off the bolt and it looks nice and straight, and we try to be as straight as possible for you in the shop, we really do, because we don't want you missing out on fabric. Sometimes it's just not wrapped pretty and we got to work with what we got. So a lot of times that's what I'll do is I'll make sure that my selvages are lined up so that on the fold side it's not geeked, because that way you're actually getting that true straight of grain. So you're getting the fabric truly where the weave is straight up and down, where if you left it where it looked like it was straight but might potentially have a little twist in the fold, your straight of grain isn't actually straight. And what happens when that straight of grain is actually a little bit off kilter, when you start sewing it together, that little bit of warp from not being straight starts to relay in your strata. And that's how you get curvy strips sewn together. It's not because you didn't cut straight, it's not because your strips aren't whatever measurement, they're not 2.5 or whatever you're working with. It's just that that fabric wasn't quite straight when you cut it, and so it just starts weaving, because as we've said, fabric has a straight of grain, okay? If you didn't know, it goes straight up and down, and of course it has a weave side to side. As you start going diagonal through your fabric, that's where you get what's called bias, okay? That's where it starts to stretch, because those fibers are no longer straight up and down and side to side. They're now kind of more on a diagonal. So you get bias, and bias is where funky bad things can happen if you're not experienced with bias or aren't already planning on working with bias. Because once you start knowing you're going to work with bias, like half square triangles and some of those kinds of things where you know at some point it's going to be on a diagonal and you have to work with it, you get surprises. So that's how you want to make sure if you're just cutting strips, trying to make strata, you just want to get as good a straight grain as you can in cutting your strips. So preparing your fabric that way gets you the best success as you possibly can. Now, if you have a fat quarter, yeah, you don't have a way necessarily to fold it. I mean, you kind of can. Generally with a fat quarter though, what I use as my guide is just that selvage. Okay, so this is our selvage where the nice fun print is, or the other side you can just see the holes where it's been on the machine as it's manipulated to be dyed and printed and all that. So I just use that selvage kind of as my guide, and I'll lay it on my cutting mat and then use my ruler. Here, I'll tilt you guys a little bit here. Playing with new toys here. Okay, so then I just use this as my guide, and you can see the weave if you don't have old eyes like me. And a lot of times I'll even potentially chop off that selvage and then use that as my baseline to then cut my strips. Otherwise, I guess I could have shown you how to do this guy. Nice good size mats are key to cutting. Don't try to cut full strips on little tiny cutting mats. Cutting mats are an investment. I get it, they get expensive, but they're worth every penny. Ooh, slippery table here today. Okay, so notice, here's what I'm saying. Match your selvages, and then I'm making sure that that fold isn't twisting, or I can scooch it. Like I may hold the bottom one, and then I'll just kind of manipulate the top one if I've got any kind of wrinkle in this upper fold. So I try to make sure this doesn't have any twists in it, and then this is nice and straight. And then hopefully Anastasia understood that this was going to be chopped up. Let's not cut this guy as we can turn it around. So then a lot of times I'll even use my fold, because I now know it's nice and as even as I can get it. I use that fold as my guide. So I now have a line on my ruler as my straight guide, and then I can trim down this side. Oh God, I love a new blade. If you're not replacing your blades often, you're doing damage to your mats and you're wearing out your blades faster than you need to. So definitely make sure you change these often so that you're not creating deep grooves in your mat, and that's beautiful. So now I should essentially have a nice straight line that I can then cut my strips. And then I can just start measuring from the left, and I go left to right in whatever increment I need to do. And if you take classes from me, come back to me. If you take any classes from me, you'll know I do about 3 cuts, and then I turn it around, I clean it up again, and because even I'm not perfect, and even my rulers, I go wonky, I turn squirrely, and I cut little funky one way, and I just need to keep cleaning them up. So do 3-4 cuts maybe, turn it around, clean it up, and then keep 3 more cuts, turn it around. I mean, it's a process, I get it, but if you don't want wavy lines, if you want nice straight pieces and blocks, these are just the tips that I say you really want to do. Trish, oh, how do I do this if I have multiple yards? Same process, pretty much. I will, because yeah, you know me, I like to cut several layers. I didn't bring multiples, I kind of have. I left stuff behind. So then what I do, if I'm trying to do more than one, we'll try, I'll see if I can fake it till I make it for you guys, is I would then have my second fabric, and I would do the same thing. So I would make sure it's nice and even and pretty, and I just stack them. I just stack them right on top of each other, okay? And I try mostly to make sure that my folds are on top of each other. And then I'll just press it out. Okay, see? So down here, I have one directly on top of each other as best as I can. It's as good as you can get. I'm not super OCD. I can't go for absolutely perfect, but I will go for as best as I can, 2 folds on top of each other. I do up to 3 with my 45. If I'm using my bigger 60mm cutter, I can do more, but those cuts do start to get a little wonky no matter how perfect you are. But I can do, you know, 4 or 5 layers if I'm doing my 60mm cutter. But if I'm using my good old 45mm, I generally don't do more than 3 layers, which is 6 sets of fabric. Okay, same thing. Folds are on top of each other. They're essentially all married together, nice and happy. Straight line on that fold, and just clean it up. And make sure you actually do. See, this is why I have to clean it up, because even me, I didn't finish at the end. I was in a hurry to be done. So I don't know how you guys put up with me. So I just clean it and then turn it and start cutting my strips. Oh, Miss Trish. Oh, 5 yards of fabric. You're really gonna test me. Okay. I love that you guys are participating. Actually, I really love this, so thank you so much. Multiple, like, yardage, because yeah, Miss Trish, I know you use lots of yardage. Okay, so that trick, I don't do more than 1. If I have 4 yards and I need to cut 36 sets of strips out of it, I only use that 1 piece, because that's all I can option with. But, so we're gonna pretend, so if this is huge yardage, I fold them in half, okay? So I've already ironed, try to make it, now doing the whole shifting and all that, generally I can only do it in about that first yard where I start to really line it up, get the selvage nice married up with each other on the top so that I don't have a fold on the bottom. Then as I iron, I'm consciously trying to keep those selvages together, because I know at least that first yard pretty much is clean, and as I iron, I'm just making sure the selvage stays on top of each other. So that's the biggest thing there as you're trying to iron it. Then what happens is, yeah, so I'll take both ends, so the beginning and the end of that 5-yard cut, 4-yard cut, whatever, put them together. These will be all raw, wonky, ugly, and then have these selvages nice and pretty, and on top married, and the fold on the bottom kind of married up, and you'll have big ugly edges on the beginning and the end. Same thing. So I'll double that bad boy up and then do the same process. Line up my ruler, because I should have the fold and the selvages pretty much all pretty together. Lay it on that bottom fold, clean off that right hand side, and if you're at my house, you'll I don't have all of that space because I have a lot of projects waiting to be done. I will take the rest of that bulk, so those 4 or 5 yards, I actually have them kind of rolled up on top of each other, so that I'm only working kind of like a yard at a time at most, 3/4 of a yard at a time. The rest is kind of rolled up. I've cleaned off that edge, and then I rotate that whole hot mess, and then I start cleaning, cutting my strips, because I've started a nice clean line. So I'll cut strips, hopefully, I'll get 4 cuts in, and then yeah, you just kind of do the whole thing again. That's just why I don't deal in large yardage. I stick in smaller quilts, so I don't have to deal with it. But for those of you that do, that's my best tip for you, is you're still going to be in this constant state of trimming and cutting strips and turning and trimming, and just have a lot of space to work with. If you like using a lot of fabric and make big giant quilts, hopefully you have a lot of space to do that. And yeah, just kind of as you go. And I have, in the process of that, sometimes I've gone back and re-ironed and replayed with fabric, because I feel like it's getting out of control, because to me, that straight of grain, not getting your bias in your strips and those kinds of things, that's the most important. So that's also why a lot of times I'll buy a little bit extra. That's why here at the shop we always we call it the rule of thumb. Generally you get at least like an inch more, because we don't always know how straight it's really going to be. It looks straight off the bolt, but it may turn out wonky in the end. So we try to give you a little bit extra, because we know you're going to clean it up, and it misbehaves. We don't like it, but it's the life of fabric. So hopefully that made sense and helps you out. It's a process. You just do it. Once you get in the habit of it, you don't think about it. I mean, I've been doing it long enough that it's what I do. So those hopefully are my basic cutting tips. Having good long rulers. big rulers if you're working in big yardages. This is my Creative Grid 8.5 by 24.5. This is what we use in the shop with the Gypsy gripper. This is exactly what I have at home. This is what's in my sewing room for all my cutting of strips and those kinds of things. And then, you know, like I said, replacing blades. It sucks. When they're on sale, buy a 10-pack so that anytime you have issues, get a new one in there. You will thank me for it later. Oh my God, you, as employees, we get giddy. We're like, oh, somebody changed the blade, and it's so much easier. It's less pressure on your wrist and your arm trying to cut, and you're not chopping through your fabric and just making it ugly. And I get they're expensive, but happy quilting to me is just way more important than getting that blade to last one more project. Just, it's like needles. Yeah, change the needles. If you're not changing needles, those two guys, God, do it. Get our Fifth Saturday bag. Use that to stock up on all those accessories so you don't feel so bad as you're swapping out needles and swapping out blades, and you're just happy sewing and you're not cussing anything out, because you know what? It's those little things that just make it work so much better. So hopefully that may have solved some problems, told you something you didn't know. That's what I'm here for, is just kind of let you know what I do. And you know, they seem to work for me. So otherwise, you know what? Enjoy all your sewing life. You know, it's a beautiful day, but you know, I'd rather be sewing. So for now, I just want you guys to keep on stitching, and we'll see you next week.